Oh my gosh, you're speaking my language because codependency with parenting is a huge button for me because I think, especially in this culture today, parents are way over functioning and overdoing and way too preoccupied.
Welcome back, Empower Nation, to another episode of Empower Her Money podcast. I'm your host, Angela Duncan. Today's episode, I get to interview Dr. Sarah, and we are going to talk about her book, Co-Crazy. We're going to talk about her journey. We're going to talk about what it means to be co-crazy, especially geared to my women listening to this podcast. I'm going to provide you with lots of tools and information that will help you on your journey. And today's episode is sponsored by morewithangela.com. Keep more, make more, live more, where we are bringing private opportunities to you. So help you on your passive income journey, earning double digits on your passive income journey. Go to morewithangela.com today. Schedule a call with me directly. Let me help you earn passive income. Morewithangela.com. Hi, Dr. Sarah. Welcome to Empower Her Money podcast. Tell me something awesome about today.
Thank you so much. I'm just really happy to be here. I love spreading this message, and I know your podcast is all about empowering women with money, and I have the same goal, except in a different department, but empowering women to find their voice, to set boundaries, to help with their codependency, because I believe most women have codependency. If you're a woman, you can grow up codependent. So we'll get to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So why don't we start with your story before we get into the amazing things you're doing today?
Right. Well, I'm someone in recovery from addiction. So I just celebrated 40 years of sobriety, which is amazing. I got sober when I was 24. And what happened is I ended up marrying someone who was someone in recovery, and they relapsed after 15 years of recovery. And meanwhile, I have a practice of 30 patients. I have a child at home. I mean, you've talked about your own situation, and my life imploded. And I thought to myself, man, if I specialize in this topic and it's hard for me, it has to be hard for the average person. So then I just kind of got on this mission of helping people with their codependency because I know what it's like.
Gotcha. And so
Yeah.
you wrote this book for those watching it. It's called Co-Crazy.
Yep.
Obviously, I love the pink part of it. That really speaks to me. But what inspired you to decide to write a book?
Well, like I said, I think I realized in my practice of 30 years with mainly women. I mean, the thing is, mostly women come to therapy. I mean, less men come to therapy. And usually women come to therapy around relationships. And I specialize in addictions and codependencies. So many women would come to me that maybe were married in addiction or grew up in addiction or had some addictive tendencies. And to me, the codependency starts way before the addiction. I mean, when we grow up with parents that may have certain issues, either they have addiction or a mental illness, or they're just preoccupied with their own lives, or they're narcissistic, we can tend to grow up being very focused on what they are thinking and feeling and doing rather than what do we need and want, especially if there's a little bit of a paradigm where the parent isn't doing their job that well.
Yeah, and I can
Yeah.
understand that too. Even with children, we get so consumed by what's going on in their world that becomes our entire environment too.
Oh my gosh, you're speaking my language because codependency with parenting is a huge button for me because I think, especially in this culture today, parents are way over functioning and overdoing and way too preoccupied. And obviously, there's a balance, but they aren't letting their kids have their feelings, number one, and failures and getting a bad grade on a paper. Like, it's not, the parents personalize everything like it's about them rather than this is your child's journey and let them have it. So I'm glad you said that because parenting is a huge one.
Yeah. So for your book, Code Crazy, can you kind of explain what that term means and why you chose that to be, the title of your book?
Yes, I can, because what happened over those years with patients coming in is women often would say to me, I'm not sure what's going on, but I feel crazy. And they weren't crazy. The environment might have been crazy, or they might have been married to an alcoholic who they would say, geez, why are you drinking? And he'd say, I'm not drinking. And thus that leads someone to believe, oh my gosh, they start doubting their reality. And so that's what happens over time. Women start doubting their truth. And so, you start to feel like something's wrong with you rather than something's wrong with the relationship. So that's why I use the word crazy. I mean, I know it's kind of a controversial word in women and psychological development, but it's what women said to me. So that's why I said, titled it that.
Yeah, and I think we can respond and relate to that because that feeling when you said, am I going crazy? People can think, listening to the podcast are like, yeah,
Yes,
feel that sometimes. So it's nice to know that it's not just me.
absolutely. And all it means really is I'm having a lot of feelings. And I may not even know what those feelings are, but I feel overwhelmed and I can't identify what's happening for me. And that's part of the recovery journey from codependency is, the first step is really starting to identify what is going on in my internal landscape because I've spent so much time over functioning, overdoing, focused on other people. And you talked about it on another podcast, getting burnt out. You lose touch with what's happening inside of you. You know what your kids are feeling, or your partner's feeling, or your boss is feeling, but you don't know what you're feeling. And that's where the recovery is. It's really coming home to yourself. That's the beginning.
Yeah, and when I was reading through your book, codependency, for me, I always think of codependency in like an addict, drugs, or
Yes.
alcohol, but it can be so much more than that, right?
So much more. Yeah, I mean, like you said, the early definitions, I mean, really, Bill W. and his wife back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, I think, first said the word codependency because she wrote a chapter in the big book about being married to Bill W., the alcoholic. And then in the 60s and 70s and 80s, so much came out, Codependent No More with Melody Beattie, and all these books on growing up in alcoholism and the word codependency. But for me, it's you don't need to be married to an addict to be codependent.
Hmm.
It's really a dismissing of yourself. And I was thinking about all these ways around money. And because I'm a specialist in addiction and codependency, I was thinking, first of all, with money, and you may ask me at this point, but I was thinking about this morning. In the money realm, a lot of people put down booze and then become addicted to gambling or addicted to money or addicted to spending and then get into debting. I mean, there's so many arenas that can happen with money. And then on the other hand, if you're a codependent person, I was thinking about myself in my first marriage, how I compromised what I wanted by denying I really wanted to marry someone who had their own money. I had money. And I said, oh, no, no, that's okay. I love him. And that's part of codependency is kind of dismissing our own needs
Hmm.
and making a relationship okay that may not be okay. So there's so many pieces to it.
Yeah. Now, being a therapist, how much of an impact from someone's childhood does that kind of have on their relationship or their codependency?
Okay. I mean, you're talking to someone who really believes in environment. It's not that people don't have their biology, but I really see us like computer systems. And so you're born in an environment, in your situation, for example, our early belief systems are created from those object relations, which are basically the dynamics with our parents. So if we have a parent who is unavailable or rejects us or is preoccupied, we're going to create beliefs about ourselves out of those dynamics. So
Hmm.
I'm someone that believes a huge part of it is that programming we got early on. Not that we can't change it later, but those beliefs about others, about the world, about ourselves happen very, very early. And like you've talked about on other podcasts, the fear, like say financial fear. I mean, when I do fear work with people, I can say, gee, when did that fear start? And they can say, geez, when the lights got turned off when I was 4 years old. I
Mhm.
mean, so financial fears and security fears, which is really what it's about, can
Mhm.
start way, way early. Yeah.
Yeah,
And,
I
and can also set up the desire. I know a young man who grew up that way, and he will never not have money because his whole thing was, I'm never going to feel that way again.
mhm.
So he was like, a millionaire at 40 because he said, I cannot feel that. So it can lead to all kinds of different manifestations when you're an adult, not necessarily that you make lots of money, but definitely ways to avoid feeling that insecurity and lack of safety.
Yeah, and I think for like me personally, there are some things that I've become aware of, and they
Yes.
may not be habits that I can necessarily stop, but when I'm
Yes.
aware of it, I minimize it. So like, growing up in poverty, I like to buy clothes now. It gives me that immediate happy feeling because I couldn't do that as a kid. But I
Yes.
recognize that behavior and I do budget myself so I don't overspend. But I allow myself to have that little bit of shopping because it does help make me feel better, maybe not for a long term, and it may still be a coping, but I'm not going into debt in order to
Perfect.
satisfy that, but I recognize it too.
That's perfect. I mean, the awareness is really the first step. And that's so brilliant because again, it all depends on the motive. If I'm feeling a fear of not having enough and thus leading to some compulsive behavior of shopping or something like that, that's different than saying, wow, what is this behavior about? Oh, I'm trying to fill this void that I felt when I was a kid. Oh,
Mm.
I can separate it now. It's not going to take away those feelings. Is it going to make me feel good sometimes when I dress well? Sure. I think it's really looking at what the ultimate result is. It's not going to take away early pain, but like you said, is it going to make me feel good to be dressed well? Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
What are some practical items that we can kind of put to use today as we're working through some either childhood or dependency issues? What would you recommend?
Yes. So the mantra on my YouTube channel and in my groups is, what do you need? What do you want? What do you want? What do you need? And it's because we are so detached from what we want and need. So, say you're in I don't know, a debate with your husband or whatever, your partner, and you're really focused on their feelings. It's bringing it back to you. What am I feeling? What do I need? What do I want? Because the problem with being codependent is it's always about what someone else wants.
Mhm.
And we get totally lost with what we want. And the problem with that is, like I say in the book, is when you spend a lot of time dismissing your own needs, you're going to end up with a lot of consequences. Number one, you're going to have a lot of repressed anger. You may have a lot of anxiety because for women, anger can be uncomfortable and some women just get anxious. You may start getting headaches. You may start getting stomach aches. You may get depressed. I mean, there are so many consequences of when we dismiss ourselves, and yet we don't connect the dots. We don't realize that. So the first step is really just like you just said, having awareness. What do I really want in this situation? Say you're dating. I just started dating again, and it's knowing what you want. So when you go on a date, if that's not sitting in front of you, you have to say to yourself, this isn't the person. But
Mm.
the problem is with human beings, when we want something, we can rationalize it, we can minimize it, we can deny, we can say it doesn't really matter. And then we end up in the same cycle. So, really being aware of your thought patterns, what you think. Am I going into some type of denial? And saying to yourself, what is the truth? What is the truth? Because I mean, it sounds so elementary. The truth will set you free, but knowing your truth is so important to be able to communicate it to a partner or
Hmm.
a potential dating person. I mean, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so
Yes.
practical. And I like that too. So when I was going and reading the book, there were some sections in here called the Code Crazy Reminder. And
Yes.
I'm all about practicality. I don't, I've gotten to a point where motivation isn't my need right now. It's
Yes.
how do I do that? So that's one of
Yes.
the things I like about that. So what made you decide to put those like little reminders in the book?
Yes, I'll tell you why, because addiction and codependency, the main component is denial. It's a thought problem. I mean, addiction, I often say it's the only illness that people have, but it tells them they don't have it,
Hmm.
right? Someone who's an alcoholic or a drug addict believes literally they don't have a problem. And it's the same with codependency. I mean, I've met couples where the wife is saying, "Oh, he doesn't drink that much. He's fine." So again, the partner can be in just as much denial about their own lives than the addict. So I give the reminders because it's something that you need to really practice and continue to say to yourself, what is the truth? And I have a tool in there called Just the Facts, I think.
Hmm.
And the thing is, one way out of troubling relationships or troubling situations is to say to yourself, what are the facts? Because I've had clients in abusive relationships that come in and say, oh, he's not that bad. And I'll say, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to write down every day he says something abusive to you, right? And then when they come in 30 days later, they can actually see the facts of what happened over a 30-day period because it's so easy for us when we're afraid of change, afraid of getting out of a relationship, afraid of taking care of ourselves, setting a limit. It's so easy to say it's not that bad and to minimize something.
Hmm.
So just the facts are really important, staying in the truth. I'll tell you one other thing, Angela, is that, and I say this in the book too, that the two things that literally every client had in common was difficulty speaking up, difficulty saying their truth. And I'm talking powerful women like you. I mean, not just someone who's passive. I'm saying everybody. Like
Hmm.
a woman who goes out to dinner and her husband says, "Where do you want to go?" And they're like, "I don't care." Because they don't want to upset the man or they want them to feel powerful or they just don't feel like they have their voices. So having your voice, number one, knowing what you want and need and being able to speak up. And number two is being able to set boundaries. Because if you're in a relationship and you can't set a boundary, whether it's about what people say to you or do to you, you're going to be victimized and you're going to be enraged and it's going to come out somewhere. So I often say when you're talking about practical tools, start with easy ones. So if you go to Starbucks and they give you the wrong coffee, don't just walk out and say it doesn't matter. Say, geez, could you please change this? Like start with people that aren't as threatening than your mother or your father or your kids or your spouse because setting boundaries is not only good for you, but it's best for both of you. And that's what people don't understand either. When you're clear in your relationships, it helps the other person. They
Hmm.
know what to expect, right? Yes. So
Yeah.
speaking up and setting boundaries are two really key tools.
Yeah, and I like that too because, from perception, finding my voice has always been something that's difficult for me, and I don't think I really have stepped into that until
Yes,
my 40s, which means I went, 40 years of my life, well, at least my adult life,
right.
not, expressing what it is that I need in my boundaries. So I love
Yes,
those tools because it is important because what happens is you're allowing for somebody to treat
yes,
you or react in a way that doesn't sit well with you. And then that kind of can make, and I do believe like the emotion part of it, you hear stories about women go into the doctor and they
right.
can't figure out what's wrong. Well, it may not be something that they can fix, the doctor can fix. It could be something emotional or in their environment that's making them sick. And I truly believe that as well.
Oh, I'm so with you. I mean, when I started my career, I don't know if you've ever heard, you're in Miami, but there's a famous hospital around here, McLean Hospital, and a lot of famous people go there. And I remember when I got started getting training there, when I first got out of graduate school, there was a woman, one of my first clients. And when I interviewed her, she'd had depression over and over and over again, and she had not had any results. And she was there to get ECT, which is electroconvulsive therapy. I'm sure you've heard of that. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember interviewing her. Oh, I could get choked up talking about her. And she was in an abusive marriage. She was being
Mm.
abused by her husband. And I remember saying to the psychiatrist, it doesn't matter how many times she gets an ECT treatment. If she goes back home and is abused by her husband, she's going to still be depressed.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's so important to know all the variables. You're exactly right. If you can't just treat one aspect. And I really believe people learn how to either express their emotions or deny their emotions. And like we were just talking about those early paradigms of childhood,
Mm-hmm.
if you learn to just repress, 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 that's going to come out somewhere. Or it's either going to come out in a sickness or a depression or
Mm-hmm.
panic attacks or whatever. So it does manifest somewhere. It's just finding out where.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I totally agree with that.
Mhm. If someone is listening to the podcast and they're thinking about maybe starting their therapy journey, sometimes it could be scary to start that. What advice would you give to them?
Yeah. Gee, that's a great question. I guess what I say is that when you start therapy or some journey on getting better and feeling better, there is a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? But if you don't, there is no end.
Mm,
So, I mean, I often say to people, yes, therapy might be a little painful at first because you're having these awarenesses. I mean, oftentimes it gets worse before it gets better. But if you're staying in a bad relationship, for example, you're just going to keep getting progressively worse. So it's not going to get better. And you're also going to keep needing to do more and more to not feel it. So
mm,
either your addiction is going to get worse, or your illness is going to get worse, or you're going to need to be busy all the time, or whatever your thing is, because it's not going to change.
mhm,
So I guess that's what I would say is just hang in there and trust that it's a process, and that, I sponsor people in AA, and oftentimes, I'll meet someone who's either been an alcoholic for 25 years or someone who's been in a bad relationship. And after a week, they say to me, well, why aren't I'm like, you've been doing these behaviors for 40 years. And you think after like a couple of insights, you're going to be like, leaving your marriage or whatever it is. But, they don't have any patience with the process. And also, it's really hard to face the truth sometimes. And this one woman, even just the other day, was very upset and crying. And she said, I can't believe I've been this way. And I said, I know it's really painful to look at sometimes, but the crying will end. These are emotions that have been there forever. They're not going to, they need to come out. But eventually, you won't be crying every week or every month, or you know what I mean? So it is trusting that it will get better. So
yeah.
that's one.
Yeah, and I agree with that too. And I feel like if you, especially as women, entrepreneurs and business owners, if our house is not in good order, it's going to affect your business. And what you said right there is then, we're going to dive into the business more because we feel like that's what we have control over. But if you're not fixing the house piece of it, then you really don't have control over anything.
It's so brilliant. And you just brought up control. And I will say that with codependency, and this, codependency, the core is fear, and the same with addiction. And what do we want to do when we're afraid? We want to control everything. So
Hmm.
that is so brilliant because you're absolutely right. One of the big symptoms of being codependent is you're trying to control everyone around you.
Hmm.
And that's why it's scary to pull it back to you, because you have to tolerate the feelings that are going to happen around not needing to control everything. So
Hmm.
that's a really great insight. Control is huge.
Yeah.
I mean, for human beings too, not just codependency. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
everybody.
In general, yes, for
Yeah,
sure.
in general. Right.
All right, Dr. Sarah, I have a fun question for you.
Sure.
If you could have a superpower, what would it be and why?
Yeah, it was funny. I was thinking about this question earlier, and I think what I would love is to have a magic wand and to tap someone on the head and for them to see who they really are.
Hmm.
Because the thing with women is, oh, here I go again. I'm getting choked up. The thing with women, especially, is they don't get their magnificence.
Mm.
And I sponsor people, I have patients, I have friends, and they're their own worst enemy. I have a girlfriend who's gorgeous. She's blonde, thin, she's been gorgeous her whole life. And she sees herself as the opposite. She
Hmm.
thinks she's fat. And she's done so much work on herself. And I often say to her, my biggest wish in my life is for you to see who you are,
Mhm.
because it doesn't matter what someone looks like. Many women are beautiful, but don't think so. And so it just would be so great to be able to do that, to have someone really get their own magnificence. So that would be my wish.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So a reminder to the audience to go grab Code Crazy. And this is
Yes.
available where?
On It's available on Amazon, or
Perfect.
go to my website too, drsarahmisho.com. And there's a lot of podcasts on there talking about codependency. Yours will be on there. And also I have a YouTube channel called Leaving Crazy Town, which is based on the tools in the book. And we do topics each week. And they're only little 10-minute videos. And I do it with a friend of mine, an attorney, a male who's 8 years sober, and he's hilarious. So we try to take these very intense topics and have some lightness and give tips and tools. So check that out as well.
Awesome. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for your time today.
Thank you. You were wonderful. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you so much for tuning into Empower Her Money podcast. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to subscribe, share this podcast, and leave a review wherever you are tuning in.